They thought the stone would keep its secrets. Then when the chisel kissed it, the slab exhaled, so softly that only the knight with his cheek to the floor felt the breath on his skin and lifted the torch a fraction higher. The flame leaned away as if something below had just drawn in. Silence has a shape on the temple mount. It spreads in rings from the center of the ruined courts, slips down stairwells, sifts along half-forgotten corridors. The Templars learned its edges by touch. They came in the early 12th century as guardians of a holy city and promptly behaved like thieves of time, sealing doors no one noticed, carrying tools at night, leaving the bright world of prayers and markets for the underworld of dust. They were not searching for gold. They were hunting for arrangement, marks, rings, names. They had heard the whispers long before Jerusalem, how the first temple had been built not by men alone, how a king's seal had bent the invisible to carry stone and carve light into angles. If the stories held any shape at all, it would be under these flags of ancient rock. The first markings made no sense. Not Hebrew, not Greek, not the Sabian ciphers some of the brothers had learned to exchange with merchants. A line struck through a circle with 3 teeth, a wheel without spokes, a star with one point filed down until it almost ceased to be a star. Touching them sometimes brought a faint vibration, as if a cat were purring in the stone. The monks who kept the hours for the nights wrote that recovered scrolls came tied with rotting red cord, ink dark as coal wet with blood, script like bites in the page. The text spoke of a ring, Solomon's, more engine than ornament, a sign that commanded, compelled, and caged. A ring that had not just ruled spirits but shut them in. The deeper they went, the stranger the physics of prayer became. One chamber refused flame. Torches guttered the moment they crossed its lip, as if the room drank fire out of the air. Voices lost their echoes. Men who descended whole came up with words turned to splinters. The priests called to bless the place left salt white, and later when they confessed they could not say what they had seen, only that the silence had weight and pressed upon the tongue. And the quake came. In 1117 the earth shrugged. Walls that had stood for empires gasped and shifted, hairline fractures running like veins through stone. A breach appeared along the eastern underfoundations. The smell rising from it was not merely dust but ash steeped in oil. The knights were first. They sealed the breach from pilgrims and mullahs and priests alike, and slid into a passage no hand had touched for 1,000 years. It corkscrewed down, then leveled into a circle so perfect it made men dizzy. In the center was not a pedestal or altar, but a door laid flat into the bedrock, a disk the size of a millstone with no hinge and no seam. Only a ring of symbols cut so fine that the torchlight trembled inside them. Steel broke on that door. Heat did nothing. Prayer did less. The humming began on the 3rd night, a low thrum that was not heard so much as felt in teeth and in the soft place behind the eyes. A young brother collapsed with his palm on the center mark and woke with his voice missing. He wrote one word shakily on a slate before fainting again. Listen. They chose to bury it. They collapsed the tunnel mouth, redrew the maps, forbade the oaths that would bind their tongues to truth. But a few could not let the door go. Their rituals changed. They gathered by torchlight in semicircles, armor left on hooks, robes black with symbols no bishop could bless. Their chanting was not Latin, not Greek, not any tongue for men. It tasted like iron in the mouth. Once the air filled with the scent of sulfur as if a match had been struck in the lungs of the earth. It spread. Across the sea in Acre, within a fortress married to the rock, the knights chiseled a room into the bed of the world. A low, round chamber with 7 sconces and walls too smooth for any mason's pride. The sound there was constant and soft as breath. It did not echo. It did not carry through air but bone. Visitors walked in thinking they were not afraid and left with their hands shaking, the language they owned suddenly too small. The knights called the place nothing. Others called it the Whispering Room. On a night when the torches burned without wind, a man repeated a word he could not remember hearing, and his body became the mouth of something else until 5 brothers pinned him and bound his limbs in belts. The door was sealed. The hum did not stop for 3 days. Stories and fragments followed the order like a faint wake, a mirror that reflected no flame, an obsidian plate that showed faces for a heartbeat, eyes closed as if waking, then vanished like thought, a strip of leather inked with names not found in any book, heat warm to the touch, refusing fire, buckling knives, a red thread wrapped 3 times around a book that could not be opened or cut. the cord humming with a pulse like a throat swallowed once and waited. A lullaby among shepherds in the hills north of Aleppo, sung to children for comfort and to stones for caution. You may rise but not speak. You may see but not act. The seventh ring seals the breath. The villagers smiled as if the words were nonsense. The man who recorded them woke the next morning with his equipment ruined and a note in his own hand that he had no memory of writing. There were maps that did not map streets. One such page, smuggled into Paris and later burnt, had the city of Jerusalem sketched like a heart with a single word below the Temple Mount. Abyssus. Someone had shaded a throat under the platform as if to say, the hole is not down but through. Ottoman surveys later found passages that led nowhere and were sealed centuries before the Ottomans. British engineers in the 19th century pried open a shallow chamber near the mount and traced a circle on its floor that matched a medieval Solomonic diagram, line for line. A worker who stepped into it blinked twice and fell softly, the way a candle goes when it runs out of wick. The church learned to be quiet. Popes who wrote boldly about kings and crowns scribbled in their margins like frightened students. One note advised, bind the knowledge with ash. Another asked a question no doctrine could answer. If they speak to the silence, who speaks back? A codex whose number cannot be spoken without a smile from anyone in the Vatican who knows what a smile means was called dangerous, not because it lied, but because it remembered. The word used was perilous. The book was not burned. It was put deeper. By then the order had begun to rot from two directions. From without by envy, from within by sound. Men who dreamt of the door under the circle woke with dried blood under their noses and the taste of coins on their tongue. The accusations that ended them were political, financial, human. But one charge refused to die with explanation: that the Templars kept a head that spoke without moving its mouth. The confessions are broken things torn from men by heat and fear, yet even broken things can cut. It opened its eyes, one wrote. It knew the end. Another said the stone it was made from was not from any land he knew. You could dismiss it all as a fever of history if the pattern did not refine itself. Exiled knights built a chapel on a Spanish hill where the sun at noon cast no shadow on stone. Its walls matched angles from the first fortress. Its roof bore a sigil faint as old breath, a loop of circles inside an octagon the color of water. Villagers do not go there now. Birds do not roost. On the solstice the light pours straight down as if the sky were a throat and the chapel its mouth. A grave in Portugal hums at night with a tone too low for ear and just right for bone. No name, no date, only an 8-pointed disc inside a double ring carved into the lid. A Jesuit got on his knees to hear and stood with his lantern dark and his face older by years. The family who tend the little plot will not sell or show. They say it is quiet ground. They say the hum is nothing. The way people talk when they do not want the world to notice a dog that will not go near a particular door. A vaulted room in a Belgian lodge requires silence for 13 minutes on a certain night below a certain number of steps. 9 names are spoken. They are never written. The men who descend are not soldiers. They carry no swords. The guardians below do not look like saints. And still the chain held. Some called it the chain of 9. Not a metaphor or a poem, not a list of virtues, but an actual arrangement of acts and places that had to be kept in their orbits. 9 points of tonality in stone. 9 intervals in a song that was not sung but pressed against the world, until the world remembered how to be still. The first point was under the platform where Solomon's workers bent the invisible and drew geometry like reins. Another point hung in the whispering room at Acre. Another under the chapel with no shadow. Another beneath the grave with the humming lid. Another in a fortress that fell with smoke and a sound like a name spoken through water. The chain did not live in one time. It required maintenance not of muscle but of attention. Intention is a muscle too. When it weakens, old doors remember how to breathe. The last years of the order passed like a man walking past a mirror that does not show his face. They burned their grandmaster and called it justice. They took what they could find and called it treasure. One ledger in the Pyrenees, a dry column of food and candles, breaks into a single line of prose as if the scribe forgot to be a scribe. The vault beneath the high wall has been sealed. Light within it danced, though no flame was seen. A different hand resumes the accounting the next day with the price of onions. Centuries after, a banker's hall in London knocked down a wall and found a chamber that should not have been there. A chair in a ring of iron filings, hair like a struck coin, and a feeling of being watched by something that did not need eyes. The men put the wall back up quickly. Their internal memo used words no accountant should use. Reinforce the ring. Resume cycle. Do not interrupt. It is possible, if you are patient and tired enough, to draw lines between these things and call the picture madness. It is also possible, if you put your ear to the right stone, to hear the low chord that makes your molars sing and your doubts blink. Scholars call it legend. Engineers might call it resonance. A king once called it obedience wrung from the unseen. The ring was a device in his hand or a symbol or both. The seal drawn on doorways was not decoration but a pressure door, a lock in a language older than letters. A lullaby could be a leash if the mouth knew how to shape certain syllables and when to starve the voice of breath. Everything the Templars carried worth carrying was not weight but function. Keys of sound, arrangements of space, the memory of 9 things done in the right order so that the door under the circle would listen and sleep. It is no comfort to consider what happens when a chain like that is allowed to slacken. The world is loud with forgetting. One point collapsed in an earthquake and was never rebuilt. One chant turned to museum glass and could not be sung without waking the wrong story. A red thread around a book holds, but hands who know how to wrap it again have left only bones. A chapel stands and makes no shadow, but the men who stand under it are tourists, and tourists have never stopped anything that wanted to move. Perhaps this is why storms walk pilgrimage roads some years as if led. Why a short list of British surveys cannot be found where they should. Why a mirror vanished in a fire and left no ash. Why in certain archives there are more blank spaces than pages, and the people who keep those rooms prefer kindly to talk about saints. Perhaps the hum in the Portuguese earth is only groundwater, and the shepherd's lullaby only a song. Perhaps the worker who stepped into the binding circle merely fainted because the air was thin. Or perhaps the old machine is still running, underfed and undertended but running, its 9 links strained, one gone dark, others fraying, the pressure of its silence keeping something vast and patient on the far side of the door. If that is true, then a ritual is not superstition but maintenance, and neglect is not innocence but permission. It would mean the head that answered in the minds of dying nights didn't lie when it whispered that it knew how things end. Not with fire and trumpets, but with a name spoken by someone who thinks they are alone. The torch leaned away from the floor when the first night felt the exhale. He did not tell the others it had breathed. He told himself he had imagined it because men who sleep with swords often choose denial over wonder. Still, when he woke at night after those days, he woke to silence that felt like a living thing easing itself into the space beside his bed, and his tongue tasted metal, and his hands remembered dust, and he wanted, with a desire that hurt like prayer, to go back and lay his ear to the mark at the center and hear whether the door had a heartbeat. Some truths stay buried because they are heavy, some because they are kinder that way, and some because they are not finished. If the chain was never meant to last forever, if Solomon's mastery was only ever a pause, then there will come a voice bold or foolish enough to think that control and invitation are the same word. When that happens, the stone will breathe deeper, and what is weighted will show that it has not been asleep. It has been listening,